You're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2, and we are on location in Las Vegas at the annual FreedomFest conference. And one of the speakers here is Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, and also the author of this book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington. Senator Paul, this book came out when you were first elected in 2010. It came out in 2011. How would you assess the Tea Party today and its influence in Washington?
Well, you know, when we started, I think we were equal parts chastisement to both parties. We were unhappy with Republicans who voted for the bank bailouts. We were also unhappy with Obamacare, and those were the two big issues. And now that we've had the Supreme Court ruling on Obamacare, we're still unhappy about Obamacare. And I think, if anything, the Tea Party may be somewhat rejuvenated by its opposition. I think a lot of people thought the Supreme Court was going to strike it down, and when they didn't, I think maybe you'll see a resurgence of the Tea Party trying to have an influence in who wins the election.
Well, when the Tea Party first started in 2006, 2007, were you even thinking about running for office at that point?
No, and in fact, I went to maybe the very first Tea Party in 2007, December 16th, 2007, in Boston. They called it a reenactment of the Boston Tea Party, and it was also at the time my dad's campaign was just starting to hit national waves. And then it kind of grew, and I went to some other Tea Parties, and the first Tea Party I went to in Kentucky was in 2009, and Senator Bunning was talking about not running, or other people were talking about him not running. And so I showed up at a Tea Party. I was at my son's Little League baseball game, and I said, I'll take 20 minutes off, I'll go down to the square, and there'll be 20 people there like me who are mad about big government. And I showed up, and there were nearly 1,000 people there, and that's where I knew something big was going on.
And at that point, did you start thinking about electoral office?
No, I was sort of toying with the fact that they were talking about Senator Bunning not running, and so we started talking to reporters saying, well, if he doesn't run, I might. And but showing up and seeing that big rally to me said that there were enough people out there like myself. I tell people I'd sit at home, watch the TV news, get unhappy, throw things at my TV and curse, and then go about my daily business. But everybody else was doing this, you know, and everybody was becoming unhappy, and the debt was exploding, and the Republicans weren't doing the right thing either. And so, yeah, that's when I started thinking about it.
A lot of this book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington, is about the 2010 campaign and some of the misrepresentations of who you are. What were some of those examples that you like to point out in here?
Well, you know, the Tea Party, for one, a lot of people characterize us as not really being a movement, that some rich guys in New York were funding the Tea Party, and that's all the Tea Party was. I never met any rich guys from New York when I was part of the Tea Party. The Tea Party was so decentralized that it was city by city. And I tell people within Kentucky there's like 10 different Tea Parties. There's sometimes 2 Tea Parties in one town, and they don't communicate with each other. So there really is no sort of top-down. This really was a bottom-up movement, and a movement that really chastised both parties. We were unhappy. A lot of us were very unhappy with Republicans. You know, when President Bush said, to save the free market, I had to give up on the free market. I had to give up on capitalism. That disturbed a lot of us, you know, and so we were unhappy with Republicans and Democrats and really felt like we needed something different.
Now, you write in here that in addition to being called a Tea Partier or a constitutional conservative, I've also been called a Goldwater conservative by supporters and critics. It is both accurate and an honor to be described as such.
Well, when I got started, I reread The Conscience of the Conservative, and interestingly, it was actually first published in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, which is right outside of Louisville, and I went and met the publisher, and he gave me an original copy that was printed there in Shepherdsville, and I reread it, and I've always been fascinated by Goldwater.
And when you think of Barry Goldwater and you think of conservatives and libertarians, is there a difference between a conservative and a libertarian, and where do you see yourself?
Yeah, and in some ways the word conservative has been watered down enough that people aren't sure what it means, because, you know, George W. Bush ran as a conservative, but he doubled the debt, and he was very much, to many of us, a profligate spender himself. And we were upset with President Obama making it even worse, but we really weren't that happy with the Republican years under George Bush. So I think many people call themselves libertarian sort of to designate themselves more or constitutional conservative with a real true belief in limited government.
You wrote this before you spent any time in the U.S. Senate. Now, after a couple of years of being in the U.S. Senate, what would you change in here, if anything? And has your mind your thinking changed at all?
I would say that going up there, I feel that I understand more now how much there is an impasse, how we're having trouble getting things done. What I don't still understand, even though I am in Washington, is I've tried to take ideas that many Democrats have put forward and say we have to do, but I can't get any Democrats to talk to me. The media narrative is, oh, we won't talk to them. I've had appointments with several different Democrat senators trying to get them to work on Social Security reform. Social Security can be saved for 70 years or 75 years or really in perpetuity if we gradually raise the age and we means test the benefits. But I can't get any Democrats to even really discuss the possibility of entitlement reform.
What about your own party, the Republican Party?
Half and half. Some don't want to talk about it either. And I'm equally critical of my party in the sense that all 47 U.S. senators on the Republican side are for a balanced budget amendment, but then when we go to cut $7 million from sugar subsidies, we lose 5 or 10 Republicans who've got sugar in their state. We tried to cut 1 penny from the sugar subsidy, which would be $7 million a year, and compare that to our annual deficit. Our annual deficit's over $1 trillion. So if you want to cut $7 million at a time to get to over $1 trillion, that's 140,000 $7 million cuts. And we can't do it once. That discourages me, and that's part of the problem in Washington is we can't cut pennies, much less the billions that would have to be cut.
Senator Paul, you have a new book coming out. What is it?
Yeah, it's called Government Bullies, and we look at different ways that people are being imprisoned in America from regulatory crime. We're not talking about murder, rape, stealing. We're not talking about violent crime. We're talking about people who put dirt on their own property. These are wetlands violations. Some of these came out of the first George Bush, unfortunately. And really, we think that you shouldn't be putting people in jail for regulatory crime. In the old days, when you put people in jail, there was a difference between criminal law and tort law. In criminal law, you were supposed to have what was called mens rea, or intent. They had to prove that you intended to kill someone. If you accidentally hit someone on your bicycle, that wasn't murder, was the same as murder. But we're now putting people in regulatory crime. There's a man in jail from southern Mississippi for 10 years without parole for putting clean fill dirt on a low area of his land. Sometimes it's from moving dirt from one part of your land to another part of your land. We've gone crazy on this stuff, and some of it was well intended in the beginning. The Clean Water Act says you can't dump pollutants in the navigable waters of the U.S. I agree with that. No company, no chemical company should be allowed to dump chemicals in the Ohio River. But putting dirt on your own land is not the same as dumping chemicals into the Ohio River.
Are these some of the issues that you've dealt with in the Senate in the last couple of years? Or?
Yeah, we brought some of these people up. You know, I brought the Sackett family from Idaho. They were being assessed a $75,000 a day fine and told they can't build on their land, and they had to make it like it used to be, and there's no water touching their land. There's never any rainwater on their land. They're told it's a wetland. So the government says, well, look at our website. Well, they did, and it's not on the website. And they said, well, our website's not perfect. We brought the Dollarite family. They were raising bunnies. They were fined $90,000 for raising bunnies with the wrong license. They had a license, but it was the wrong license. They said, well, you can pay us within 30 days with your credit card. $90,000. This is a middle-class family. They said, but if you don't pay within 30 days, your fine will be $3.1 million. These are the kind of stories that we've reported in here, and these are the kind of stories that I think should make Americans mad and should say no more. This is a big government that's run amok.
What's your biggest frustration in the U.S. Senate right now?
That people haven't come to grips with the debt problem. You know, the debt's unsustainable. We're borrowing $50,000 a second. We have to cut spending. And there's so much waste. And it's not just domestic welfare spending, it's in the military as well. And I tell conservatives that the real compromise is conservatives, like myself, who believe in a strong national defense, will have to compromise with the other side and say, you know what, we got waste in the military as well as waste domestically. The Pentagon says that they are too big to be audited. That's an insult. Too big to be audited. They spend $700 billion a year. They need to be audited. And we need to figure out how we can save money in the military as well as domestically. There's $124 billion in the budget unaccounted for. We got to do something about that.
How do you foresee the debt ceiling and the sequestration debates?
Well, I didn't vote for the last debt ceiling raise. I will vote to raise the debt ceiling, but only if we have a balanced budget amendment. And people say, oh, well, that's too hardcore. We'll never raise the debt ceiling. Well, you need to be hardcore because last year when we raised the debt ceiling, we added statutory caps. We've exceeded those a dozen times. And you know what they do? They come and they bring a bill to the floor that exceeds the caps from last August that say you're not supposed to spend more than X dollars. and we raise a point of order. You know what they do? They just deem it to be okay. 80 of them, 80 out of